All right. So, Tessa did a nice job kind of introducing us, and I know it's a little bit of a slow start to the program and everything, but this first night, everybody comes here from different places and starting spots, and so we really start from ground zero, and then we'll keep building upon it and everything like that. But like I said, if you do have questions, this is a really program for you, so bring up those questions, and we want to make sure that they get answered. I'm not going to fool you in saying that at 26 years old, I'm going to know all the answers to your questions, because I'm not. But I will make sure I find the right person that can answer those questions for you. And so I know you all also have some experiences, and I think there's also a lot of knowledge and expertise in the room. And so I think even just if you feel comfortable talking to each other and sharing your experiences, that also goes a long way. Although what I can provide is some very comical stories that have really good hit home messages as far as being the next generation. And my family has gone through the process and stuff, and so I can relate to the oncoming generation, and I also have a lot of empathy for the older generation, because I understand that this isn't an easy process. So with that being said, we're really going to be focusing on what do you want. And so, of course, thinking about that, we're going to be touching on keeping family harmony. I know a lot of you identified that that's a big concern of yours, is that it's hard to do this transition planning because you don't want to upset people. What's fair versus what is equal? That's another big question that a lot of people have, right? Retaining hard-earned wealth for their heirs. I know a big concern for my dad as he was trying to figure out what he wanted to do is he didn't think it was fair that we had to keep paying like the land as we passed it on to generation. He just didn't think that was right and didn't want that to be a continuous thing. And so those are questions that he had as he was going through this, right? And of course, we'll touch on as far as what you want. It could include minimizing taxes, and then of course passing on the family or ranching tradition. So as we kind of go through that, and then of course in this module we'll provide some tools for examining what is important to you and your successors and off-farm ranch or farm heirs, because of course expectations can be they can really bite you in the butt sometimes, right? What your expectations are for what your retirement looks like and what your kids' expectations are for what your retirement looks like. Like maybe they're looking for a full-time babysitter and you're like, no, you're snotty-nosed children. I'll babysit them once or twice a week, but I don't want to be taking care of them all the time. And so being able to communicate those expectations is really important. But it's really difficult because traditionally in agriculture, we aren't the best communicators, right?
What?
Right. And so I'm just here, and I think that's like a big takeaway that I would encourage you, that after you have a great lead in to be starting to talk about the succession planning process, just by going home and telling your kids, or if it's not kids that you'll be passing on your farm or ranch to, that next generation, and just being like, hey, I attended this succession planning workshop, and this is what I have going on. And it's a really easy way to lead into that conversation and kind of get it started. So with that being said, we're going to be going like making sure that you're honest with yourself, right? About what you want, what do your successors want, and is it possible, realistic? And so the story I have here is that when my dad went in and got started with it all, he had this plan that he went up to this lady and he was like, I want to set it up so all the kids, they can come home and they can work together and they can build this, we'll say like empire. I'm being very sarcastic when I say that, but like they're all going to work together and it's just going to be great, right? Yeah. And this lady, of course, has done this a time or two and looks at Donald and says, do you have a brother? Which he does. And she goes, oh, okay. So if you and your brother were running the ranch together, could you two do it and make it work? And that really made my dad rethink things as far as how he wants to set it all up. And so that's something, as you're thinking about how you would like to pass it on, being realistic about your expectations. And I know I hear a lot of stories about, yeah, there's just a lot of horror stories out there about how people, they decide to pass things on. And if they would have thought about, if that's how the farm had transitioned to me, would I have been able to make it? A lot of times, like, you can answer no to that question. So that would be a good question that I would encourage you to think through as you're putting together this plan. You know, and so as in addition to those questions, it's thinking about, you know, is the farmer ranch viable? Can it support another family? That was something else that we discovered as a family, as my parents, they work with the Farm and Ranch Business Management Program out of BSC. And so like they come in and this guy helps them put together a budget for the year. And Dad's always like, yeah, within 2 months, like you throw the budget away because the tractor broke down and it just threw everything off. But as they were talking to this guy, he had this like Excel sheet where they could punch in how much, you know, acreage we run and how many cattle we have and everything to see if it could sustain a second family. And where we're at right now, it really can't sustain a second family, which was good information for us to know and think about, because we are thinking of, okay, in a couple of years, we're going to be needing to make some adjustments and make some moves towards coming home, and thinking about what are some added income that I can bring to a table. What can my brothers bring to the table, and how does that look, right? So that's something that you need to think about too and look into. And then, you know, how can it prosper in the future? I'm going to quote my dad a whole lot. But one thing that he also always says is, you know, I do things this way and I can make it float, but I doubt you kids are going to be able to do it that way, because margins are getting tighter, and you just, you really have to make sure that all your wheels are not squeaking to be viable in the future. Okay, so communication is the cornerstone to a successful succession plan, right? And so again, expectations. Don't assume that you know what the other wants, needs, or thinks about that family business. It's important to ask them and discuss those things with them. And so kind of along the lines of this, we're gonna start off with an activity. So I'm gonna ask you to get up, and what we'll do is, what I need you to do is, on a scale of 1 to 10, I need you to think about how you view your farmer ranch or your business operation, because I know
I'm fine.
So, and 1 is you view it solely as a monetary value. It's just money, right? You know, just that value. And a 10 is a precious family heirloom that must be protected at all costs, and you know, you would die to protect its honor, essentially. So on a scale of 1 to 10, and 5 being in the middle of like you want it to go on to the next generation, but it's not going to break your heart if it doesn't go on to the next generation, kind of a deal. So a 10, you go ahead and stand over by the plant. You wanted to see it pass on. It's very important. A 5, you're in the middle about it, and a 1, you know, you just see it as a retirement plan. when you're ready to be done, you're okay with just selling it. You don't care who buys it and gets it, and you're just ready to retire, kind of a deal.
You don't have to stand by your spouse. That's where there's some interesting conversation after this activity. Realize-
Well,
What's it mean if I go to the bathroom?
that means you're about a 4 to 5.
Just don't make much noise.
Thank you, Tessa.
Oh, you're out here. Yeah, I kind of worry you do.
That way.
Which way are you going? That would really be hard just to.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Oh, man, I don't know.
I always
Is it
say
4 and 5?
We're, yeah.
that anybody
we're in the
passes
middle.
on the farm,
We're in the middle of the
You
road.
move
up to a 6 or 7.
but here I stand.
I know.
You're gonna be a 6.
But,
But
you
in
know,
all
but they're
reality-
interested. If they
Yeah.
weren't interested, it'd be something different.
Yeah,
You know, then it would probably be easy to stand over there.
yeah.
And those of you online, if you just kind of want to jot down where you're at with that, and then if you have somebody that you can share your response with, make sure you talk with them. And, you know, for those here in the room, those with spouses here, are you surprised by the other one's answer, or is that about like what you expected? If you don't mind me asking.
That's about what I expected.
Okay, so my story with this activity is, as I'm prepping for it and everything, I decided to text my 2 younger brothers this exact same question. I was like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you value the family ranch? And I totally expected my younger brother, this is me making assumptions, I expected my younger brother, he's very cowboy-y, you know, has always expressed interest in coming home. I figured he'd say 10. My middle brother, though, he's always been a little bit more wish-washy. Like, he's had other interests. He would be the first one to skip out on cow work, to go to basketball practice, where I was the one texting my coach, like, sorry, coach, we're working cows. And if I'm late to practice, I'm late to practice. Like, it is what it is. And so I was like, maybe expecting him to be like, not a 1, but maybe like more of a 5 or a 7. And you know what he texted back and said? He said a 10. And I was just like, wow, well, shame on you, Hannah, for making those assumptions. And it's hard, right? Because, you know, that was 10 years ago when Ty was skipping out to work cattle for basketball practice, and his priorities have changed and everything. Like, I shouldn't still be holding on to that, but obviously I do a little. Thanks for participating. You can go ahead and sit down.
Did they both
I
do
think
10?
some of that,
Yeah, they both responded with a 10.
I think some of that goes back to, you know, if you're going into a 3rd generation farm, or, you know, you kind of feel like you left, if you went to sell it, you're letting the 1st generation down. I'd be letting my dad down if I didn't want to pass it on.
You know, and that changes with age though too,
Yeah.
because when I was right out of high school,
Mhm.
there was not a chance that I would ever go back to the family ranch and do anything anywhere near it. And now that I'm older, it's no place I'd rather be.
Right,
No.
yeah, right,
So
right. That's what I said before I got married. There's no way in hell I'm living on a farm, because I grew up on a dairy farm. But I wouldn't want to be anywhere else either. When it says, where else do you want to be? Right where I am. I want to be anywhere else. So I were so happy. Anyways.
Yeah, since COVID, I don't think Cheryl's gonna leave Adams County.
As fun is it to go anywhere?
That's right.
But you know, as you're thinking about your different kids, not that I'm encouraging to make assumptions, but I'm sure you could think of each of your kids and you could say like, oh, I've always thought like so-and-so would be interested in coming home, but I didn't really think my youngest would be interested. So some of you kind of make some of those assumptions, and have you ever actually had the conversation with the kids and just straight up ask them if they're interested?
My assumptions are right on with what my kids tell me now, but they're young. could be different, maybe in 10 years they change their minds, but that's too late.
Mhm.
It's gonna get done now, so.
Mhm.
The one I always expected to come back and wanted to farm, that's the one. The others want nothing to do with it, so.
Well, and it's funny how it works though, too, because the rest of them probably value keeping it in the family way up there in 9 or 10.
And they do.
My sisters are, they think of it as their home and will always think of it as their home and want, but they would never move home to take care of it. Never.
I think that's a really awesome point that you bring up, because both on my mom and dad's side, their siblings, they didn't want to come home, but they were very supportive of wanting to make it financially feasible for both my parents grew up on ranches and making that feasible for the next generation to come on. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point.
I have one that don't want to step on the other one's toes.
That's hard too.
Yeah.
And all
You know,
three of
it's-
ours love our place, they love the place, so it gets really difficult. How do you divide that up?
I know.
One rule of thumb,
It's really
From-
hard.
Val Farmer, I don't know if you remember him, he used to be on the radio. But he talked about a rule of thumb, the kid that stays on the farm gets an equal share plus 20%. Because that kid on the farm isn't getting vacation and health insurance and all that, and they've got the sweat equity in it, so everybody gets something but the one on the farm. And again, just a rule of thumb, I thought that was interesting.
Well, and I think also, it's also like thinking about my family. My parents always encouraged us kids to not come home right away. They wanted us to go and like find jobs elsewhere or work for other people, because you can learn a lot, right? As an extension agent, I'm learning a lot about different operations and
Mhm.
different ideas and what works for other people. And so when I can come home, I can be like, hey, Dad, we're having AI school next week, and I really think we should bail Grace for those 3 days, because we know it's gonna be a disaster, and this would help mitigate the stress, right? And you can bring different ideas home. And so I think like that's always a fine line. This is my opinion. I think it's a fine line between encouraging your kids to come home, but also wanting to make sure that they go out and like explore life, right? Because I also know some farmers and ranchers that they're kind of bitter about life because they came home right after high school and they've been in the same place for so many years, and they have like an amazing place in the Badlands, and like a lot of people would envy them, but they just don't appreciate it like they could, because
Send them someplace for a couple of years.
let them break somebody else's equipment.
Send them to Minneapolis for a couple of years. That'll take care of it. Watch them have their protests and all that. Yeah.
The sweat equity is, to me, is like, but that hits home with me. I got two brothers that they had nothing to do with the farm. And then when it got split up, and then all of a sudden, where's mine? And but luckily my kids seen that. They knew what was going on, and it irritated them. So they know how it's gonna, they go along with what's gonna happen from now on. I'm not gonna I've seen failures like, in the succession, and almost every time it's because the kid that takes over has to buy the other ones out. And so far my kids they just got their own careers, they got their own stuff going on, and they don't, and they know that that's a problem to have to, and so they want the farm to survive, so they don't expect that. Not yet.
Mhm.
I'm hoping I can give them something else, hopefully that works out, but.
If you're all okay with it, Tessa took a little bit longer than expected and everything, so I might jump around a little bit because this is a pretty talkative group and stuff, and honestly, I hate reading off of PowerPoints, and so, I'll make sure that we hit on home on like the points that I think are really important, but I'm really appreciating the conversation that we're having and everything. So, as you're talking about, wanting to make sure that like you're giving each child something, it really leads into that discussion of what is fair versus what is equal. And so if we can take the next, I'll give you like 2 or 3 minutes, and if you can talk to the person next to you, and let's first like pair up and kind of debate about, well, what, in your opinion, what is fair, what versus equal, and what does that mean to you? And then we can come back together and share out a little bit, because it's one of those topics where it's complicated and it depends, and everybody has a different opinion on it, right? But I think it's a good discussion to have.
It's hard.
So just go ahead and
We've had this.
talk about it for a little bit, and then we'll
Equal's not
share.
fair. Equal.
I don't know, to me,
My
I
dad
think about what you.
is an equal. I get that.
So when she
Just
goes,
already had these discussions.
fair everything to one son.
so
Why we quit. That's why we.
to me,
But an equal, I was. on the
so
farm
if you
30
give your
years,
kid that don't come to the
didn't
farm
get any different share.
$200,000, say, whatever, and sure, life insurance, whatever, and they have to stay
It wasn't really
a
fair.
job that pays, 50, 60,000.
But you want to treat all your kids.
But when you're passing on the farm,
My parents have it set right
it
now
might be worth
where
$1 million
there's
Oh,
4 of
right.
us girls.
or
and
two.
They have it an undivided
Doesn't
interest
mean
in all the land.
it's not worth that.
And I'm the only
farming
one
it,
that wants to.
generating an income off it,
So I would have to
working
buy
his
out
ass off to do it.
the other 3.
And maybe sometimes we're not making any money all year.
So.
Pretty tough.
So you equal and
Yeah, there's no
fair.
way.
That's a tough thing. That's
It's
why,
a tough thing.
that's why Bruce and I have done
So
stuff up to
wasn't really,
So where's it
actually
gonna go?
going to a
I
lawyer,
don't know.
because that's where we got stuck.
Yeah, and I need
And,
to-
you talked about sweat equity, and I said, you don't have to explain sweat equity to us. But it is really hard because,
I got broken
that
bones and
property
stitches
means
and
as much to the one who is farming
being
it
there
as it is to the ones
and they enjoy
who aren't,
other life.
or they're there. I mean, everyone lives here.
We're
That's tough.
making our own wages.
Because it,
We're
half of the asset.
putting-
all you have to say is I need help, and
And
it doesn't matter who is,
adding value to it every
it's
day.
really hard.
Yeah, that's what. I agree
And that's
about.
where we get
I
stuck.
hadn't thought about it.
Because
So yeah, there's a step up.
It added a lot of.
I don't know.
Not just that, but
You
it's
gotta be-
decisions
you gotta be big enough.
every day that.
Okay, so we're back, online people. Is there anyone that would like to share out about what they discussed with their small group?
My folks had theirs in an irrevocable trust, which they still generated income from the rent and from the cattle. But the land was, it was the trust owned the land. And so that when they both passed and we got the stepped up basis on it, the trust still owns the land. I don't know how we ever get out there, co-trustees, we can sell some of it or do whatever we wish when we wish to do it, but
And the land is owned by grandkids that live in Texas and all over. It's like, Well,
that gets
we
hard.
got
at
split
this
up
point,
with
it's
2
okay, but
7
what happens
grandchildren.
when
Yeah, that makes it
one
hard.
wants to buy something from the other?
Right.
And so I don't know how that's gonna work out, but the way they set it up, it kept our family, we still like each other.
Yeah.
you know, And we That's a big talk thing. and we, yeah,
So in theory, it was equal
yeah, and that's what they
At
did.
this stage, but yeah,
as you're passing it on to the next generation. It's not necessarily fair, Maybe.
I don't know what it'll be.
Oh, fair's not equal and equal's not fair.
No.
Exactly.
More difficult is probably the,
Because the ones in
Hey.
California, they'll say, well, give me half beef, or something, fill my freezer up or whatever, which can kind of get complicated, but it keeps the connection between the family members so that, they don't get distant, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, if you don't keep them from fighting or.
Well, I mean, there's a
They have
connection
to
there that
communicate.
that ties them together, that they have to talk to each other, they have to whatever, so. But irrevocable and all that, I don't know how that all works. If somebody said irrevocable is not a solution anymore, so I don't know. I don't know, but that so far has worked very well for us.
Is there anybody else that would like to add to the fair versus equal? Or equal is not fair and fair is not equal discussion?
I
it's hard
think
on a mother's heart. I know that.
on the sweat equity topic, I think that the sweat equity needs to be discussed prior to anyone putting an hour's worth of work into it. And instead of getting 10 years down the road and here someone has worked for years for, less than minimum wage. And then they find out, well, we're just going to chop this up. Everyone's getting the equal half. And so as that next generation moves back and starts contributing sweat equity and working, far more hours than, other siblings might, I think that discussion needs to be done ahead of time. And everyone understanding what's going on.
But that usually doesn't.
If there was an issue in ours, I would say that was an issue too, to some. It was,
Hey,
I
like,
was okay with it because he had helped me to get to the point where I was too, so.
in my situation, my parents, they never wanted to talk about it. It's not something they want to talk about. I'm the only one that lives on the place. And none of my sisters want to come back. And I've been there now for almost 10 years,
Mhm.
but it's never a discussion.
Yeah.
Of course, my dad's retired, but he's still not retired. He still makes all the decisions. He's only retired when he wants to be retired.
The older generation, maybe.
They don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, that is hard.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like my dad. I mean, I knew absolutely nothing about finances of farming. All I ever heard was it doesn't pay to farm. You
Mhm.
can't make no money. Why would I want to stay?
And that's what they tell me on a daily basis. You're never gonna make it ranching.
Oh,
Okay,
well, maybe they have two different ideas of what making it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wait,
So
go ahead.
go,
Can I just interject 2 points quick? And then I want to make sure I'm not doing a lot of talking. So first off, going back to Seth's point about sweat equity, of course, the first thing a lot of people think about is, okay, the individuals that come back to the ranch and they're working day in and day out. But I think something else to keep in mind too is, well, what about those siblings that take care of mom and dad? The ones that, my dad always jokes and says he's gonna move in with me. He's not going to the fox's hole is what he calls it. And I'm gonna we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But that is something you need to think about is that generation as they start taking mom and dad to doctor's appointments because they can't drive anymore, some of that at-home care. Making sure that you recognize that or at least have that discussion about okay, are they just going straight to the nursing home? Are we going to try to put that off for as long as possible? And also getting credit to those children that are wanting to take on those roles.
A lot of times that falls to the same one that's doing the sweat equity because they're on the farm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Their other ones are gone, so they're
General,
not,
yeah.
not always, but a lot of times they're not. Not that they don't want to, but there's somewhere else they can't do.
Mhm.
So
Right.
now you got a double working on that point, so.
Yep, that's a good point. I would also say that, I have a friend and her family, it's a mom and dad and two sisters that have come home. And so in one of the sisters, their primary role, she takes care of the grandma and everything. And I know it's taken a really big toll on her and everything, because every time I talk to her, she's super stressed out. But even if you have multiple children, if you're lucky enough to have multiple children that want to come home, dividing out those roles as well. But so if on your workbook, if you go to page 30, there's compensation for services provided, and there's the personal care, and then there's the farm maintenance. And so I do think that is something to think about. And then if you keep flipping back, there's this calculating successors management and labor contributions. And so that's another, if you're a person that really likes to put numbers on paper, it's a good resource. There's a video that goes through it a little bit, talking about punching in numbers. It's like 3 minutes long. And I can email that out to you later for you to kind of take a look at when you have more time to kind of sit down and look at that page. But I just thought those were two important pages to point out to everybody. And I know to one of the other points, bringing up how the older generation, they just don't want to think about it because it's hard to think about, well, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, or I don't want to think about the fact that I'm not going to live forever. At least I haven't figured that out. And if any of you have figured that out, you should clue me in.
I don't think the older generation had any problem hurting anybody's feelings, because they usually said what they wanted, but they had trouble communicating personal. I mean, to talk to your family was like, I guess, tearing out teeth
Yeah,
or
that
something. I don't
was-
know.
that
They
was
just
a
didn't have
secret.
that.
It was kind of a secret.
Yeah, they didn't have that. Wasn't that bond between their children and them. Like, I think the younger generation is even better than we are, but I think it just keeps getting better as we get older, as the generations come, I should say.
And it's personality too, because my dad was not probably a communicator, but when we went to my uncle's funeral, and we were all very close, and his sons were speaking at his family service, and we went, I think we got screwed. Our dad didn't do this. I mean, they grew up in the same house.
Yeah.
So-
Same guy.
Same family, I mean, it was my uncle that was totally different with his communication with his kids, and it was nothing we recognized.
You think about it, grandpa was worse, and I mean, it just, rough, tough old buggers.
And we'll be talking a little bit later. There's a whole section talking about, okay, when you have these family discussions and sit down, what are some good ground rules? How do you?
There you go.
Well, yes, to a certain extent.
Hannah, are the session planners, are they facilitators as well?
Mhm.
So would be a big thing that I would recommend, is having a non-invested third party, fourth party, fifth party, whoever however many people are in the room, you need someone else who is not
Right.
invested to say, time out
Right.
Sure. And read it, take 5 minutes and then we'll talk again type of thing. So,
Mhm.
And I mean, I know from our family's experience, that my dad was, I think he was pretty stressed out about us having our first meeting, and he talked about having like somebody there to make sure we all like stayed in line and stuff. And 2 years later, after bringing it up about a dozen different times by yours truly, we finally sat down to just be like, hey, what did you guys talk about? Or what did you and dad figure out? And honestly, most of the meeting was dad sharing what they had put together and mom chiming in a little bit. But like neither of my brothers really had a whole lot to contribute. And of course, like I was trying to prompt them and be like, hey, Tate, what do you think about stuff? Like, what are your thoughts? And they just, we're all pretty young. And so I think none of them wanted to like commit to anything right then and there. But then it was funny because after mom and dad left, I kind of prodded them a little bit because, for example, one thing dad was like, well, like once Tate graduates college, like we'll figure it out. Well, like we can hire somebody or whatever. And when mom and dad left, I looked at Ty and Tate. I was like, okay, you guys know that in 2 years, like we got to start making some decisions because mom and dad are not young pups anymore, and they may think that it'll be fine and they'll figure it out, but like we
You
should.
have a lot of good years left. You're not young anymore. Well,
Right.
you are.
Not in the
We
green
feel
bean.
like we're young. Yeah.
But it was interesting because after my parents left, like us kids talked more, and that was a really good discussion that we had. Not that we don't have our problems, trust me, we have like our own issues that we deal with.
Mhm.
But I would say one of the slides that we can go to that I think is kind of nice to think about a little bit is, wait, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Okay, too many computers. Reset it. Is this SWOT analysis. And so a SWOT analysis is just looking at your farm or ranch and identifying what your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. So what do you do really well as a family, right? I would say that the Nordbys, when things start falling apart, we're really good about just coming together and helping make stuff happen, a weakness, I have this written down too. I would say a weakness is that Nordbys like to overcommit. We have 3 million irons in the fire, and when we take one out, we add 2 more. When I think about opportunities for our family, I think about how we have my grandparents have a place up in Beulah. And so there's opportunity that if all 3 of us kids want to come home, we can spread out and we can still support each other, but we can also have like our own places where we make our own decisions and we're not stepping on each other's toes. Like that's a strength, and not everybody has those opportunities. I'd also say that we're pretty creative thinkers that think outside the box. So those are some strengths. And threats, I would say that communication is always a really big threat, right? Making sure that we're all on the same page about what we want and what we don't want. And, just that factor, when rubber meets the road, are we able to work together as a team to make things happen? We always say that we're stronger together than we are apart. But that's always easier said than done, right? So I would just really encourage you, if you want to take like the next minute or so, and like when you think about your own family or your own operation, like, what are some strengths, what are some weaknesses? Opportunities for growth. Or just opportunities in general for your operation, and what are some threats?
I have a question.
Yes.
What about incorporating grandkids in this? I mean, now most of us are older and we haven't done this, and our kids are old enough that it should have been done already. So what about getting grandkids? Because they got a fire and iron of it too. I mean, now and then you run into the problem, you run into ages from 10 to 30 or whatever. Some of them are old enough to really know, and some of them are halfway down their path already.
Then you have the in-laws and the outlaws.
Right, that's right. There's a lot of people to deal with.
You know, I guess in my opinion, the meeting itself, like for the Knutson side, should not involve me. Because it should be the Knutson children that do that. And on my side, it should be myself and my siblings. But, how do you?
I agree, because you start getting grandchildren involved. This happened. I got experience with this, and that's not a good deal. Because you're just involving too many people. So you need to settle it with your family, your immediate family first. Then whatever they do with whatever they get, that's their deal. But you do not want all them grandkids involved in that. That's what happened in our situation anyway, and it was not good.
Okay.
Grandkids that had absolutely nothing to do. Now, this is different. Maybe you got grandkids working on the farm. That might be different. My my nephews and nieces had nothing to do with it. So that gets to be a total different story. So there's two different situations there.
Yeah.
Really,
I still think you almost got to deal with the immediate family first, and then let them deal with their own kids.
and kind of adding to that, like, this is a decision that, you really are the captain of the ship, right? And so you get to make these decisions based on what you think is best. And when the next generation is going through this planning process, they get to adjust things, because they're like, yeah, mom and dad were idiots when they did this. And we want to
No
do
doubt.
it differently.
But I agree with Mike. Absolutely. You get too many fingers in the pie in anything. But if we do our job right, you can pass it on down to your boy, and then he can do his job right without all the estate taxes and so on.
Right.
It's just on us for now.
And I would also add to your point, as far as when you're trying to decide, do you involve the in-laws? Do you not? And, I know that my family has shared with me that when they first came home, my mom was a saver. She had like a bunch of money saved up. And when my parents came home, my grandparents made it through the 80s, but they were in the red, right? And so when they first came home, my mom, she like drained her savings account so that they could buy, but so that they could buy a tractor their first year when they came back. Sorry. But like, anyways, my point being though, like you do have to, it's up to you if you want to involve those in-laws, because they can be a huge asset to your operation, and they can really like throw their entire back into it, right?
That's right.
That's
Each is
another scenario.
individuals.
That's
Yeah.
another scenario that you don't think about,
No. And I can remember when Bruce's parents started their estates, thing too. And I wasn't involved and it hurts. And, you know, and not that I, you know, it was fine, but there's different things that can hurt. And then those feelings are always there. I mean, you always have that little edge there that you try to forget, and sometimes it comes up, but so, you know, you do have to be mindful, and that's why I think it's so hard, because you love your family very much,
Mhm.
and you don't want to cause unnecessary problems and hurt feelings, and, you know, and you're trying your best to treat everyone what they're worthy, you know, you want everyone to.
Fair and equal.
Yeah, there's not even, it's not even true. You can't be fair and equal.
Wonder about the economics of all the thing, whether you passed on. If they survive.
Yeah,
I'm glad you brought that. When we set up our trust, all the spouses were hurt.
yeah,
But like with you, you were on the farm probably investing, whether checking cattle or doing what, and so all of a sudden you're excluded, you don't count. So I'm glad you brought that up.
yeah. And it was at the lawyer's suggestion. I mean, it was, and it gets to be complicated when there's too many people in a room. And I, you know, I mean, I don't know, but we have to be mindful of everybody that's involved, and
And the level of involvement.
yeah,
I mean, at this point, the land is being rented out. So none of the kids are involved. You know, so it's like, can you involve? I mean, I guess I have some background that I think is helpful,
mhm,
but do they want to hear it?
right,
You know,
right,
same with my own family. I have background that is helpful, but some of them don't want to hear it either.
right, right.
Well, then the other part of this thing, if you set it up, so you should set something up, so say, whatever, if you should pass away, you should get his share.
And that gets touchy as well.
She's not my wife, but I know what you're saying.
You know.
You're not
Well,
gonna
she's
share
got
with
a
Rhonda?
different deal. You know, yeah, you know, I mean.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
No, no wonder she's crying.
But she's not my wife.
See, the way my parents have it set up is it involves no spouses whatsoever. It is just their 4 girls. And then from there, it will go to grandkids. It will not go to a spouse. So
I come back to Cheryl's sake, you have
while
something to offer.
they're
and you
still
did.
alive. So if one of their girls passes away, it will go down to the grandkids. But if they pass away before, then it's up to whoever.
How come they
And I
bypass the
think you
spouse?
To keep
I
it
mean-
in the family.
To keep it in the family. Because if
Sometimes
they were to
it's-
get divorced,
Oh, the divorce deal, okay.
then the
yeah.
land could be split 50-50, and it wouldn't go down to, they'd have to sell it and split the money rather than it go down to the grandkids,
Yeah, I see.
which would cause all kinds of chaos.
That's what I said.
And that's strictly just if, in case there was a divorce.
And that's why you don't get involved with those meetings, but
Right,
you know, that's probably one of the major issues.
But they did invite the,
Well, you were all there,
Yeah.
everybody was there, but.
mhm,
so
Where
they
the
were
ground
involved
rules
in-
come
right.
I mean, it is, it's really where the ground rules come in. What?
And probably like having an open and honest conversation, like if you decide that you initially just want the kids there,
Mhm,
just explaining like we appreciate the work that you're doing. Right now, we just want to figure out the family side of things and then we'll open it up. Like, you know, again, a lot of this just goes to clear communication.
Right.
And
Some of that is too, you have to trust that your spouse is, you know, say me and my wife, if on her side, I would just trust that she was doing whatever was best for our family.
mhm,
And she should trust that I'm doing the best that I can for her and our family. Without muddying the waters. It's, you know what I'm saying?
mhm. Well, and sometimes what happens too is I know of like two brothers and they farmed like most of their life together, but their wives didn't like each other.
Mhm.
And so they were each whispering in the other ear, like, oh, so-and-so is not doing enough work, or so-and-so isn't doing their share.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's difficult.
And not that, I mean, eventually they were going to have to split up because they each have their own kids and everything like that. But it definitely, it goes back to you're stronger together than you are apart. And
right.
so,
Right.
any other
I'm gonna have
thoughts?
more questions when we're done with this than before I.
You got a support group, right?
Or a hell of a support. Yeah, I like this.
Okay, so we talked about fair versus equal. So, did anybody have any thoughts about the SWOT analysis, about things that you think your family does really well, or weaknesses, maybe some opportunities?
That's probably something that a person really needs to spend a little time on, because recognizing our own strengths or weaknesses is a difficult thing
Mhm.
for most of us.
So it's in your workbook, there's a whole page that um 23, there's a worksheet, and I made extra copies because I think this is something good for you to take home and like share with your kids. You know, a lot of this stuff, again, just so many lead-in questions to start the conversation. And I think you can go through that. And as far as like opportunities, what you might see as an opportunity, your kids might have a different opportunity in mind. Like, I think agritourism is a really cool idea. And my dad would never do agritourism because he doesn't like people that much. Like, there's a reason he's a rancher and he likes his alone time with his tractor. So I do have extra copies. If any of you would like extra copies, I'm happy to share them with you. I'm just trying to figure out what's the most important. So what I think I'm gonna have you all do is if you turn to page 21. There is this rating lifestyle, values, and choices in your workbook. And let's take the next 3-4 minutes or so and just go ahead and just rate what you think is really important is a 5. If it's kind of important, but it's a 3. And if it's not important at all, it's a 1. And so just go ahead and I think it's good to do. We've been doing a lot of reflecting out loud and sharing, but I think having some time to reflect with yourself would be good too. So I know not everyone is done. But we're clicking closer and closer to 8, and so there's, or 9, so there's a couple things I want to cover and get you out of here on time. But I would encourage you, if you haven't finished it, go back to finish it. I also have extra copies of this if you would like to take them home. Of course, you can make copies of your own workbook if you want, but hopefully most of you filled them out, right? So I have some blank copies that you can take home with you. And share. Again, I know these are tough conversations, and I think some of the things that those questions cover are good questions for everybody to be on the same page about it, and just kind of wheels thinking and turning, right? What I did, before I get too far along, Jack said that he thinks it's useful for the grandkids to see what's happening and how it's managed. That helps them learn how to deal with it when it's their turn. No, not so much be involved in making the decisions, but it's good for them to see how the whole process works and where we screw things up. I know he benefited a lot by not being kept in the dark regarding their grandfather and grandmother's estate. And so, that's up to you. I will say, like, as my parents are going through this, I'm always asking them questions, not that I want to tell them what to do, obviously not. But I want to know why they made those decisions, and then I can help, it helps me better understand the process. So that's one thing to think about, referring to how to involve the grandkids and everything. The other thing that I handed out was succession plan timeline. That's page 44 for those online. In your workbook. And so in your workbook, why I gave you an extra copy was because I thought it would, if you wanted to, I'm a deadline person and I'm a goal person, and I like to be able to check things off when I've accomplished them. And so the next 3 weeks are going to be coming a lot of material, and to help you start the conversation, I thought it would be, if you wanted to write down goals, like maybe between this week and next week, you just want to tell your kids that you're taking a succession planning workshop, first step, baby steps sometime, but you can just kind of write out those goals as you're going along and get in that process. Because I know how easy it can be. You come to the workshop, you sit here and listen to Hannah talk for 3 hours for 3 nights in a row, and then you go home and you set that workbook on your kitchen, and then it gets covered in nail and dust, and you don't think about it until like 2 years later. And you're like, oh yeah, or maybe you never pick it up again. So this is just some ways to help keep you accountable and keep you moving forward. And I would encourage you to just sit down and write down a couple goals that you want to get done between now and next week. This participant binder, it has, my facilitator binder is a little bit different, but in the participant binder, it has all the slides and everything. And then it also has a bunch of supplemental material. And so if you're having questions about, long-term healthcare planning for North Dakota farmers and ranchers, we have a publication for that. That's kind of extensions thing. We have a pub for everything, but it just goes into a lot more detail with a lot of the topics that you might have questions about, right? And so I would just encourage you, I know we spent 3 hours together tonight, but, take a couple hours this week and just go through those 2 different modules. And if there's areas that you need some clarification on, go ahead and read about it. Like I said, next week we'll have Next week, what's on the agenda? But next week, we're gonna talk about the next generation and your legacy, and then really covering family meetings and conversations. And then, like I said, we'll have that producer panel. And I would definitely bring all the hard questions that you have for them as far as how do you start these conversations? What's your definition of fair versus equal? You know, I think we had really good discussion tonight, and I only think those producers can add to the discussion. And yeah. Questions, comments, concerns?
Do you have Excel documents for all of the the air contributions?
I can look into that. I think, let me look into that.
I was just
don't
looking
wanna
at your
promise.
PowerPoint slides. It looks like that's an Excel document.
Mhm.
These ones here.
I think so. I think so. I will do some digging, and I will, if there's any Excel documents, can I just email it out to everybody? And then, and I'll also include a link to that video that goes over that page about when you're the sweat equity and how you determine that. So I'll email out the video and any Excel documents that I find. We should.
Perfect.
Any other requests online? Do you have any requests? Anything else? Okay, well, thank you all for coming tonight. I know it's a really big time commitment, and I hope you felt like it was well worth your time and everything. And I can promise it only gets better from here. So,
Well, thank
all.
you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thanks.
It's the past time. Maybe. Be a little more definitive on this.
Are you wanting to go? Oh. We can.
Round steak,
Round steak, yeah.
tube steak, whatever.
Oh.